Welcome to the Fresh and Fired Up podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Marshall, here to help you function at your best in health, fitness, and life, joined by my co-host, Hailee Piendl. Let's get fired up.
Let's get fired up. Oh my gosh, you guys just experienced Emily's I'm trying to make you guys think that I'm not sick voice. It was so funny because
I
you
am
went
so
right
sick.
into host. Okay, this is my host voice. I cannot let anyone think that I'm sick right now, but Emily is very sick. Please update us.
Yes, if this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, I promise my voice doesn't normally sound like this. Oh, I came through taking care of my husband and all my kids, and I was like, I haven't got sick. This is awesome. And now it hit me. It's my turn. So number 6
Your
in the
turn to
family
be
here.
pampered and taken care of is what I'm hearing here.
That's what's happening next. Yeah, that should happen next. So I will be recording this episode, and then I'm going to get some extra rest after this, and it's going to be great. So we will try to be friendly on your ears and let Hailee do more of the talking. We'll see if I can actually stick to that. Good luck with that.
We love your voice, even if
thank you.
it sounds
Thank
a little
you.
bit like you smoke too much.
I promise I'm not a smoker. Okay, so here's the deal. We have had a couple questions come up throughout this week, and I kind of love how this happens. Do you find this where things happen in trends where you're like, nobody's asked me this in a while, but then now multiple people ask me?
Yep, that happens to me all the time where it's kind of an overarching theme of a week. We have
Totally.
themes.
Yeah, themes. And this is what's crazy. It's like the people who ask me these questions, they don't even live in the same areas. It's not like they're from different parts of the country, which I'm like, this is fascinating that this is coming up this way. But here's what we want to talk about today. The big picture of what's going on with your hormones, how that can affect your training and your life and your rest and all the wonderful things. And before we hit record today, Hailee's like, okay, so what were we talking about again today? And I was like, the hormone priority system. And she was like, what? And I'm like, okay, well, maybe that was a weird way to say it. So what I'm getting at is there is a hierarchy for production of hormones in our bodies. And so how that hierarchy goes is survival, reproduction, then bonding. So your body's always going to prioritize. If you don't have a lot of resources in your tank, if your fuel is low, your body's always going to prioritize survival first. So what does that mean, Hailee?
So to the person who asked you the question, it was specifically from what we said in a previous episode of low progesterone. And I had mentioned that if you're in the luteal phase, and obviously progesterone is the higher hormone in that phase, if you're stressed, cortisol will always be prioritized in production over progesterone. So then you see all of the PMS symptoms, you're spotting, your cycle is really mean to you. And people are like, why is my cycle so mean? And they think that they need to go and get progesterone cream or do a progesterone pill or something to boost that up. But in reality, it's probably your cortisol taking over and kind of stealing away that progesterone that you could be making to make your period a little bit nicer to you. So to your point of the hierarchy, your cortisol is being produced because that's what you need to survive, and your body doesn't care if it's your emails or to-do list or a bear that you're running from. It doesn't care. If you have really high chronically high cortisol, it will be obviously prioritized, and then you will not have your reproductive hormones. Your cycle might become inconsistent or gone altogether, right? So
Exactly. And so when your body is chronically in that high stress state, and this is a tough one because it might be external stresses or it might just be internal stresses in your own mind and in your own body. But either way, your body physiologically does the same thing. So what will happen is when you're running high stress, cortisol levels are high chronically, your body will intentionally downregulate progesterone and oxytocin. So we want to talk about that back loop because I feel like there's missing pieces of the puzzle for many people when they're thinking about this. So I want to just dive right into the low progesterone, high cortisol connection. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of physiology here, and then Hailee's going to make sense of it all. So this is going to be exciting. So there's something called and sorry, this is biochemical terms. So it's pregnenolone. Okay. That is the
Ooh.
pregnenolone steal. And so what that is it is a precursor within your body. So basically it's the mother hormone. Okay. It does a lot. And what happens is it is the precursor for both progesterone and cortisol. And under chronic stress, your body diverts pregnenolone to cortisol. So it will prioritize that, meaning there's less of that precursor to be used to make progesterone. And the result is functionally low progesterone, which, like, even if you have healthy ovaries, all of those other things, it'll just look lower. So it's not a pathology, it's an adaptive survival response, which
Mm-hmm.
are very different. Now, if you're in the perimenopause phase of your life, the first thing that your brain is going to do is like, yeah, but it makes sense. I'm perimenopausal. I'll have low progesterone. Well, here's the deal. Your progesterone levels are already naturally declining at that point because your body's getting ready to be like, I'm no longer in the reproductive phase of my life overall. But when you add cortisol on top of it, it tanks them even more. So it
Yep.
makes the symptoms worse.
Yep.
Hailee, what do you have to say on this?
Yeah, I think that another missing piece here is a gland in your brain called the hypothalamus.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think that it's like your reproductive system's issue, but it's your brain that kind of controls everything. So you think that, oh my gosh, if my progesterone isn't being produced because progesterone is produced by your ovaries, it's your ovaries problem. But it's not really. It's more so the connection, because your brain tells and has all these messengers that it sends out to communicate with your reproductive system. It's called the HPA-O axis, hypothalamic pituitary
That's what I was
adrenal
just going to say.
ovarian axis.
It talks to your
So that whole
the hypothalamus talks to your pituitary gland, and then your
Yeah,
pituitary gland
exactly. So
actually causes
everything
those
is
releases.
intertwined, right? Which we've already said this so many times of it's an umbrella thing. Like it's never one singular thing that is happening that is wrong that is causing this domino effect, right? I think a lot of people like to hyperfixate on like, oh my gosh, I'm not eating like chasteberry. That's why all this is happening. Like it's never
Yes.
that. It's usually either your stress amount or quality of food that you're eating, or overstressed or underslept. And I think that it can all kind of be intertwined in that. But I just wanted to add that to your point of like, it's your brain's communication with your body, not necessarily your body's issue, if that makes sense.
100%. Yeah. And that's a good way to describe that adaptive response. It's your brain is constantly interacting with your environment and going, okay, like, what do we need right now? So if you think that if your brain is like, I'm perceiving threat
Mm-hmm.
constantly, and that's the deal is like people sometimes in their lives, they'll think, oh, well, I'm not really stressed. I'm not really a high stress person. It's like, but is your brain perceiving that and telling your physiology that you are in that state? And that can come in many, many forms. And that's where it gets like even more complicated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then like the oxytocin portion of it, I think every single woman listening to this can relate to like being high stress and not having any like whenever I'm super high stress, I'm like, don't freaking touch me.
Don't touch me. Yeah. Okay, well,
So
let's get into that more. Save that thought. You're totally right on that, and I can explain a little bit more why that happens. But I do want to point out this before we move on from our calming, right? Like from the progesterone being naturally calming. The
mm-hmm.
reason for that is because it activates GABA, which is a neurotransmitter in our brain. And I thought this came back really well to your point about your brain. It's starting at that point because what that does is okay, so the calming neurotransmitter, GABA, what it does is it lowers your nervous system excitability. And so that creates a really good buffering effect for what the hormone cortisol does in
Mm-hmm.
making your brain being like in a higher excitable state, which gives you more of that like increased anxiety. So just think about this: when progesterone low and cortisol is high, you're more likely to feel feelings of anxiety. You're more likely to have lower quality sleep. You're more likely to have PMS type symptoms in your luteal phase. And you're also more likely to have then an even increased because of those things, then it increases your cortisol production even more, which is crazy. It's a self-reinforcing loop. This sounds like doom and gloom. But this is what's cool is I really think that if we can naturally increase oxytocin levels, that we can combat that significantly. So that's kind of like, I feel like oxytocin brings hope in this scenario.
Yeah, I also want to point out too, like you kind of differentiated luteal phase. We are naturally a bit more able to handle stressors in your follicular phase, and then in your luteal phase, it becomes a little bit harder. Where then you're going to find this like sort of mental taxation, and everything kind of feels harder. So just again, to our point that we've made a million times before, know what phase you're in and kind of adjust your schedule as necessary. Of course, like we can't always control what's going on in your life, of course, but like if you can kind of manipulate your schedule or push things like further in so you're not going to overdo it in terms of like mental load or mental capacity, workload, all of this stuff, then I highly recommend doing that. And like knowing where you're at in your cycle can be very valuable for that.
100%, which is hilarious because last week when I shared the episode where I was in the struggle, I had 3 weeks ahead of time marked on our calendar, M needs extra rest, because it was like right at the peak point of like where my body needs extra rest. But then the entire family needed me. So I just to your point of like life's not always going to go that way. At least you can be aware of it. At least you can try your best with it. But then if you're not able to get like the full rest in the way that you think you need it, sometimes it's just like micro habits that can help you through that, right? Which we talked about on last week's episode. So if you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it.
It's not like one singular thing that happens is going to throw your whole cycle off. Like,
yeah,
it's what you do on a consistent basis. Like if you're consistently overdoing it with like your to-do list and your load and like constantly living like that, then of course. But if you have 1 month where everyone gets sick, your car breaks down and all this stuff happens, then it's just kind of a one-off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. But it's also sometimes a good signal for a reset for yourself, but then also for your loved ones. There are times when we can push ourselves and like be in that high achiever mode, and people become, if you're capable and you're loyal and you're showing up constantly, it's like you get things done and then it's just expected, which can be a good thing, but taken to the extreme. Sometimes when life says no more, you need to slow down. It also tells the people around you too, like, okay, we all need to be working on this stuff together, right? So yeah, resets can be good either way.
Yeah, I think we talked about that last time.
Yeah. I was just bringing that up based on if they haven't listened to last week's episode. Hello, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Make sure you find us on Spotify and Apple. I'm just throwing in a little advertisement for our own show, Hailee.
We got to do it. We have.
How's my ad voice, guys?
We have to self-promote. So anyways, let's get into this oxytocin because I'm very curious as like your take on this.
I agree. So oxytocin is released when the nervous system, is in parasympathetic mode. And when we are not in parasympathetic mode, we are then more in the sympathetic mode. That is when we are in that high cortisol state. When we are in that high cortisol state, just a sec, my nose is running. What happens is oxytocin is low. Okay. When we are in more of a parasympathetic state, this is like our body is in safe mode and we're not perceiving a bunch of threat, then our oxytocin levels generally come up. So here's what happens. High cortisol, it's the whole like keeps your brain scanning for threats constantly. It reduces the oxytocin receptor sensitivity. And what that does is it then suppresses oxytocin release. So even if you can verbally say, of course, okay, I love my kids, I love my spouse, I want connection, oh, I should hang out with my friends, like all of these things, because it's so much, oxytocin is all about like connection and bonding and relationship and feeling safety and all of those types of things. What happens is you might be able to say verbally, yeah, I love these people in my life, but your body doesn't always feel it. And the reason why, and this comes back to what you were talking about earlier, Hailee, which is women who are chronically in that stress state, high sympathetic tone in their body, their nervous system's hyperexcitable, they will often experience emotional numbness. they will report irritability, the feelings of irritability, or sorry, am I saying that right? Yeah, like
Irritability?
being irritable,
Yeah.
instead of affection.
Mm-hmm.
They might feel things like, okay, yeah, I know I love them, but I don't feel like loving in a sense. Touch aversion, which is what you brought up. You're like, oh my goodness, don't touch me, because your nervous system's already in this
Yeah.
high excitable state, and it's not calming.
Yeah.
And then what happens, which makes the cycle worse, is there'll be this disconnection
Mm-hmm.
from wanting intimacy. So it becomes very disconnected and isolated instead of the opposite, which is helpful. You can expand on that. This is physiology, though. This is not always a relationship failure. We're talking more about the physiological thing that just happens.
Yeah. No, I felt that actually when I was moving and everything was going, like everything was happening all at once.
Yep.
And it's like, you just want to isolate yourself, and you kind of know that that's not the best thing to do. And then you become just numb. And I totally feel that. And so, in terms of like, this happened to me very recently, getting out of that, I think that is one of the best things that I learned, was just like taking very baby steps, because it can feel really like overwhelming, because you already have all this stuff. You have a bunch of mental load. You're taking care of everyone. Maybe you're taking care of like a family member. That's a lot on your emotional capacity and your brain, right? Not everything needs to change all at once. I think that was the most important thing that I learned through that, of like, you can just take very small steps forward. Another thing that I learned as well was, when you're in a sympathetic nervous system state, that fight or flight, I noticed that my breaths kind of change. And I have come to learn that when your inhale is longer than your exhale, that kind of triggers that sympathetic nervous system state where you're very heightened. And so flip that and have your inhale shorter than your exhale. And that kind of drives that parasympathetic state. So you can kind of think more clearly, because when you are in that high cortisol, it's like, you can't really think clearly. You're just like threats and leave me alone and all of this stuff, right? So I think that breath and the fact that we can control, that's the one thing about our autonomic nervous system that we can kind of control, I think is very important, that I learned through that. And I learned this all through Dr. Heberman.
Beautiful. No, I was looking this up, like just thinking through why this helped, being chiropractic background, right? I was having this thought about like, okay, because we can increase oxytocin levels with high touch, but I've experienced patients who, obviously some people love going to get a big long massage and it calms them, and it like, but then there's some people who it's like, it's too much touch, right? So I was thinking about like why we have some patients who love chiropractic care when they're in this high sympathetic state, because we do fairly quick adjustments. So I like get in there, do a quick adjustment, like release that relaxation state, increase the parasympathetics if we're focusing on certain areas of the spine. And it kind of gives them this rush of calm that is fairly like not a super long sustained amount of touch. And this is where I think too, you can kind of help yourself with, depending on if you have a team of providers that you can lean on to and go like, oh, I really need a massage right now too. Or, oh, I should go and get an adjustment. Or, there's different things, but I was thinking about that when you said that too, with the touch aversion. There are some patients where it's just very gentle and fairly quick adjustments, and it's like super helpful for them. And it just kind of gets your body started into this state of like, okay, I can do this. We can start implementing the other things. It wakes your brain up a bit. Now you can start to increase that exhale and start to do some of the other things that are going to be helpful, right? So sometimes it's just pattern interrupt too.
Yeah. And I think those are the good ones, like immediate. I think sometimes we need that immediate, like, okay, I need to get into my parasympathetic. And then obviously the systematic things that like,
yes,
we obviously don't want to keep continuing waking up and like feeling like crap. Right.
Yeah.
So another thing that I learned, ironically, this was on Instagram. I don't know if you know Allison Stone. She played in like Camp Rock. This might be completely out of your generation.
That's okay. I've heard of, but don't really know much. So do teach.
She was talking about like burnout and stuff like that, and what she had done, and I thought this was so genius. You create like a page of columns, and because I think that we can get into this very urgency mind thinking. And like for myself too, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to keep this standard that I had for myself, but now I have everything else that I need to do. We've got a dog, we have to, like, I don't sleep anymore. Like 2 jobs, like all of these other things, and then I'm like, on top of that, I have to make all this content. And I'm like,
Yes.
Hailee, why are you keeping the same standard when, like, things have changed? So anyways, column 1, things you absolutely have to do, and write down the things that you absolutely have to do. Like, we cannot push this. Like, okay,
Yes.
this is what I'm going to do. And then things that you can delegate. So the second column will be like things that you can delegate, ask for help, just maybe offload. Third column, things that you can completely omit or omit from your schedule. And like, this is absolutely not helpful. It's not propelling me forward. It's not moving the needle forward, whatever. And then the fourth column was things that you can move to maybe next week or next month. And it just kind of released this whole like, okay, nothing is that urgent. I'm not a brain surgeon. I don't actually need to do a bunch of content because no one's going to care if I post 2 less times this week.
Yeah, that is so good. And it makes
Yeah.
so much sense. And like what you said resonated so much with me too, Haley, with like depending on what you're looking for outcomes at certain phases too. Like as you know, I haven't been really posting on social media at all or very minimally.
Mm-hmm.
Our podcast is still growing, so thank you to those of you who have been sharing the show. That's amazing. We couldn't do this without you. But it's interesting because I still had an inquiry from a client to take on another training client. And I currently like just have a few clients right now. And we have so much going on with our clinic and with our kids that I'm like, I'm in a good phase. Like personally, I'm like, we just need to keep rolling with what we're doing. And I actually didn't take this client on. I was like, I would love to help you, but I just, my bandwidth is where I want it to be right now.
Yeah.
So part of my thought process in the past, I would have been like, I just had to pump out content for the sake of it. And what I realized was like, well, I'm not actually in a, I want to attract more clients phase. Like, sure, you can be in a state where you're like, if you have the bandwidth and you can just purely altruistically being like, I'm just going to pump out content only purely because it's just helpful for people. And that's great if you are in that phase and season. But if you're not, it's like, that's okay, right? That is really okay.
Yeah.
And then there's the times where you're like, okay, well, no, we need to push and like, we're in growth phase. I think this happens with training too, right? We talked about the whole episode. We talked about where you're in growth phase or you're in like maintain phase.
Yep.
And sometimes that maintain phase looks very different.
Yep.
And I feel like that happens for every area of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I had a rude awakening on like my standards for myself.
Yeah.
I think that can cause and inflict more cortisol secretion than I would like it to.
Yes.
And I was talking to my dad about this too, because he is very like, he works out so freaking much. And he was like, Hailee, I'm so tired. I'm like, well, you work out 3 hours a day. And he's like, but I can't stop. Like, I feel like a failure if I don't do like 3 hours. And then I was like, oh, wow, you've created such a high standard for yourself that now anything below that is still considered good is going to be bad. Right.
Right.
And I feel that with myself so much too, especially with like the content thing. I don't know what it is inside of my brain about my content, but I'm like, I need to do a YouTube video every single week or YouTube's going to kick me off, which obviously not.
Well, and I wonder because you've grown so much and you are helping so many people, right? Which is good. But then it's also figuring out, the line of like, what is your current capacity compared to like, how many people you can help? Because you will hit a point where you're like, we have this with the clinic too. You hit a point where when you start to cap, that's where your growth, it's called the leadership lid, right? Where you like hit that glass ceiling. And that obviously changes and raises over time. But I feel like there's times when there's bigger jumps in it. And then there's times where it feels like it plateaus a bit. And you're like, okay, we just got to get our feet under us again.
Absolutely.
And then
or just kind of like stay where you're at. Like there's been many times in my career where I'm like, okay, no more clients. I'm just going to stay here until this starts to feel easier.
Yes.
Because at the start, I think I had like 10 clients and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much. And now I think I have like 40. And now I'm like, this is my at least regular. Like It's
Yeah.
fun. I feel good, but like you have to kind of like stop and kind of get your footing for a bit, get the systems like we've mentioned before. I think systemizing a lot of things or just kind of taking a pause and seeing, okay, what is your weak link? What is like, where's the holes in the bucket here that we need to patch up in order to make it a little bit more sustainable, and then keep going. So like not expecting like overnight to win the lottery overnight too, I think. And like that's more of a personal boundary that I think people need to more so be self-aware with. Like for myself too, I was like, more money, more money. But it was just very stressful, and it's like money is not everything. You need to like really focus on the longevity of what you're trying to create and the mission you have in your life and what your real values are. Like for yourself, like your family is obviously very high in priority, so like to take on more things, it would not make any sense.
Yeah, at this point, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting, and I think how this ties back into even what we've been talking about, Haley, is for when you said something really profound there when you said, "Ah, until this feels good," right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the physiology in your body shifts, where you're like, okay, things are systematized, and you have now mastered more skills. And when you get into that more mastery state, then you all of a sudden your body relaxes, your body and your brain.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Absolutely.
happens now is you're like, oh, this seems more sustainable because those cortisol levels are coming down. Then you're going to get that natural rise in like progesterone and oxytocin together. And you're going to feel like you have more energy and capacity
Mm-hmm.
for your work, for your exercise, for your family, like all the different facets, right? And so with that being said, let's say hypothetically, you're like, you just tell yourself no, kind of like what you said with your dad. You're like, no, I need to do this anyways. I'm going to ignore my body signals. I'm going to ignore my brain signals because for whatever external reason, it's like, I just need to do this because this is what I do. And if I don't do this, I'm failing, right? Here's what happens when we do that. Now we get this storm of low progesterone, low oxytocin. They show up together in the female body. When both those are low, you're going to end up more with the PMDD like symptoms
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
your cycle, rage, tears before your period, insomnia, specifically if you're always getting insomnia in that like 2 to 4 a.m. waking point, that's a red flag for you to go, okay, overstimulated. You're feeling overstimulated by the people you love. You start to show, you will have more people pleasing and resentment showing up,
Mm-hmm.
high empathy but low emotional safety, and then difficulty receiving help or affection is a big one too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think rumination is a big one
Mhm.
too that I've definitely kind of felt. It's more like every little thing is blown out of proportion.
Yep.
And I think that comes into like everything's a threat, right?
Totally.
Everything's a threat to you, which it could just be something that's normal, that's happened forever, and now it's something that's an issue,
Yep.
right?
And
Because your
this is
brain's
very common for former athletes,
mm-hmm.
working moms, perfectionists,
Mm-hmm.
women who are like, I need to hold it all together for everyone,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I see that a lot with like again, the athletes perfectionism, the kind of like all I'm either all in or I'm all out kind of thing. Just like the lack of um I think it's got a lot to do with emotional safety, like you mentioned, of like just like your entire environment and just looking for things to pick apart because our brain is programmed, especially when your cortisol is high, especially when you're in this like survival mode. Our brain is wired to look for all of the negative things because that's how it's going to predict something that might happen or predict something that bad that might happen later. So I think just also knowing that like your brain is programmed for that negative, to not let that negative ruminate in your brain, be like pattern interrupt. Okay, this is something that's biologically just happening because it's happens, but if we don't put a stop to it, then it's going to continue to happen. You're going to continue to feel like shit and you're going to continue to feel exactly like how you feel. So kind of have to like be self-aware enough or add that awareness, intention, and then change it.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. Okay, to your point, I was like doing some searching this week and I realized something profound with when you're in this state where you have a lot on your plate, right? And your hormones are doing all these things we've talked about this whole episode, and like your neurotransmitters and your brain's blah, blah, blahing, right? What can happen is if you actually take a look, because you talked about how, like, I love that you shared lining things up and figuring out like what needs to be done right away, what doesn't, what can we essentially like do, or what needs to be done, what can we dump off our plates, what can we delegate, or what we can defer, right? Like we kind of have these different ways we can categorize. Well, there's something that happens. I learned this about myself, that are these assumed roles. So things that you just take on over time. So there's the actual commitments you've made originally that are like the bigger rocks. So we've got these big stones, these small stones, and the sand. This is the analogy. Okay. So let's say you're like, I'm going to take on coordinating this like I have my regular job, but I'm now the president of the gymnastics club, which is a nonprofit. I'm just saying I've been offered, but I'm like, no, I'm not doing this right now. But here's what happens. It's like, oh, nobody else is volunteering to do it. We want the non-for-profit to keep running. There needs to be the board members and all these people who are like volunteers, right? So you take on this volunteer position, but then what happens is like the big rock is like, I took on this position, right? The smaller rocks is like, okay, I got to make sure we have all these seats filled because we need to vote on these different things. Okay. The sand is then, oh, well, but this person couldn't show up to that meeting and my secretary's not available. So I'll just take the notes as well this week. And now you're like taking on all these like other little like roles that come with the bigger rock role. And so when you're thinking about like, what can I do? What shouldn't I do right now? You have to really try to look at like, don't just look at like, is this a big rock? Yes or no? Because there's always going to be these small rocks and sand that come with it. And you have to try to look at like the whole picture of it. Or you can set those really harder boundaries where you're like, okay, I can commit to this schedule. I will show up to teach this class, but because that's what I said I'd do. I said I'd teach this one class. But when all these other people are like, well, I can't teach my class. Can you teach my class for me? You are going to have to start saying no to teaching other people's classes too.
Yep.
And I feel like that's a huge deal. The other place that can show up is like where you start to assume that, okay, because I'm the mother and because I am a wife and a business owner, right? I have these roles that I'm responsible for. These are commitments that I made that I'm going to follow through on. But then all of a sudden I assume that I am now like the emotional stabilizer for everyone in my family. Now I'm the emotional stabilizer for all my employees in the workplace. And it's like, no, that's this assumed role that you've taken upon yourself that doesn't need to be your role. That can become very draining.
I think that's a lot of people pleasing.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, I think that comes with that, and being like wanting to be there for other people, but then self-neglecting.
Yeah.
Which is obviously more so a people pleaser thing, and like you're scared of conflict, or you don't want to say no for the sake of letting people down. And so I think that's more so like a harder realization that someone might have to like have with themselves of like, do I actually want to do this? Do I even know? Like, am I doing this just because I don't want to deal with them being disappointed in me? Or am I doing this because I genuinely want to do it?
Yeah.
So.
And I know something I've done is where I will assume like, oh, I don't want to like overtax the other person. So I'm just going to assume it's fine. I can handle it. There's this like, I can handle it. I don't want it to be too much for you versus being like, there are areas, and we can do this with our kids too, right? Where it's like, no, there's areas where you need to let them stretch because the only way they're going to grow is if they have some struggle. So not viewing it, this is something I've had to work on in my own mindset to be like, it's okay to let someone else struggle, because by allowing them to struggle, instead of trying to buffer their struggles, now if you buffer their struggle too much, you've just stolen their opportunities for them to grow.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And it's like more so I think it's kind of selfish too to like rob that from somebody, especially if you know. I think that being a mother is going to be very humbling for me, and I'm sure that you can relate this more so
It is.
towards your kids because I feel like obviously being the mother and instinct, it's like I just want the best for my kids. I want them to not struggle, but like essentially you're ripping away their opportunity to be like human beings of their own and go off into the world and be okay and like essentially doing your job if you're going to like baby them, right?
Too much,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so I
Well,
think that's gonna be
and
really
even
big.
looking at like your again, when it comes back to capacity, it's
Yeah.
there's the energy side of it, which a lot of these hormones play a huge role in, and a lot of what our brain is doing chronically. But then there's also the time, right? These things take time and change occurs over time in our brain and our body. So I've had it where I'm not necessarily trying to not teach my kids something,
Mhm.
but I'm like, well, we need, every time we're going out the door, it's like, we need to go, we need to get there. I'll just tie your shoe for you. And then all of a sudden over time, you realize their age and you're like, you don't know how to tie your own shoes yet. Shoot, I haven't taken the time to be like, okay, no, you do it. Here's how you do the loops, like when they're little.
Yeah.
Because it takes time and effort. So you have to look at, again, those are kind of those sand pieces within our rock analogy where you're like, there's a lot of little components on the day to day, and it all takes time and energy. And you need to look at the big picture to go, am I going to actually carve out enough time to do all those little components? And that can show up even with like taking time to sit down and read with your kids so they become better readers. That's
Mhm.
just kind of an aside, but like any little thing like that, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that you bring up a good point with time and like giving yourself time too. Because
Mhm.
like I mentioned before, just back to our point of like high cortisol and really stressed out is like you want it to change really fast because I think we talked about this last week too. You want it to change super fast because you feel like you're in the dumpster, but that's not how it goes. And I think giving yourself permission to not feel good in the moment and just be like, okay, I this is going to take time. We've talked about that expectation versus reality gap. If you expect yourself to have like, oh my gosh, I just need like this one hack, like I just need to go out in the sun in the morning, and that's going to be like my saving grace. Like if you expect that there's a hack that's going to get you out of this quickly, then you're going to be led back to more disappointment. So have the expectation that this is going to take time
Yeah.
and it's not going to be like overnight. And same thing if you have cycle irregularities or you do have low progesterone, it's not going to happen right away. It might take a couple cycles to regulate and for like your essentially your monthly report card to reflect what you've been doing and the work that you've been putting in. But like continue on doing the mundane things and it does get better and progress over time.
Yeah. And I think that's key. The key is not like you said, not looking for the hack. Completely agree, and realize that you can't this is to your point from earlier where you're like, well, if I just take this one supplement or this one plant whatever, right?
Chathberry.
It's like you can't supplement your way out of chronically high
Mm-mm.
cortisol. You cannot. Like real improvements come from nervous system safety over time, and that is in all areas, relationship as well as like your adequate fueling, right? Which we've talked a ton about. Under fueling is a huge one that puts your body physiologically into feeling unsafe. Strength training that builds capacity, not draining it or overtaxing it. Don't need to do those 3-hour workouts every day,
Yep.
right? Even just 45 minutes is going to be good. And then sleep. Sleep
Mm-hmm.
protection, protect your time to sleep, getting to bed earlier. It sounds so boring, but it's so effective. And you'll actually
Absolutely.
start to like it over time. And then the emotional boundaries are the mindset work that we just touched on too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Being self-aware of like what are your weak links? Are you more
Totally.
perfectionism? Do you have that all or nothing? Do you self-sabotage? Do you maybe are you addicted to chaos?
Yep.
So just kind of being self-aware and then taking obviously steps to like how can we fix this? Right?
Yeah. And what happens? This is the good part. So, this is the exciting part. When cortisol levels come down, progesterone can naturally recover. That is
Mm-hmm.
what most people don't know. They think that the progesterone is low, so I just have low progesterone. This is just a problem that I have. No. It will naturally start to come back up. Your oxytocin release improves, your cycles regulate, your mood softens, your connection returns. It's so exciting. Like, it's legitly can happen. So that's where we want to leave you with this positive note. Like, your body can do that. Is that not amazing?
It's so amazing. And like, even if you do feel like you're mentally never going to get out of this, like you can. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that you need to just kind of hold to you is like, once you start to do this, it will get better, because I know how like it's so brutal being in that spot of like high cortisol, because your physiology
Your physiology.
is working against you. And then on top of that, you have all these limiting beliefs that are kind of ruminating, and you're Googling a bunch of stuff that you shouldn't be Googling.
Well, I actually had a new patient in yesterday in the clinic, and they were like describing what they have going on. And then they're like, yeah, I did a bunch of Googling. And I was just like, so how many deadly diseases do you have? Well, like 3 different types of cancer. This person doesn't actually have 3 different types of cancer.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's crazy how the rabbit trails you can go down. It's like, okay, calm down. Let's think through what's actually happening in the whole clinical picture and then come up with a realistic game plan. Now, obviously, as a clinician, it's like there are times when your spidey senses go up. And I had a patient in on Saturday that was like that for me, that I was like, oh, no, this is bad. This is something more. Not that I'm saying like this is bad to the person, but I'm going, no, we need to send you for further imaging. We need to send you for follow-up with this specialist. Like, so that can happen. And if that's the case, you need to get to the right people and get heard and get help and all of those things, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are many times that these types of symptoms that are more connected to just the way your body is adapting physiologically over time, that's not a pathology. I would say that that is a way bigger majority of the time.
Absolutely.
So let that be a comfort to you, and know that it can get better and that we are here to support and to help. So share this episode with a friend. Make sure you leave a rating and review. And in the meantime, be free, feel fresh, and live on fire.